A deal to end the war in Iran appeared to be close over the weekend until hesitancy popped up from Republican lawmakers in the U.S. and hesitancy in Tehran. Let's go to Washington now for the very latest with our Washington correspondent, Reggie Cecchini. So, Reggie, tell us more. Where do things stand today?
Well, Miranda, they stand in a state of confusion, and that's because over the weekend, Donald Trump posted to social media that an agreement with Iranian officials had been, quote, largely negotiated. And it was within a couple of hours after that point that we saw some of that pushback from Republican lawmakers who argued that the United States may be giving in too much to Iran. And then we saw the Iranian officials come back to say that there was still nothing that had been hammered out entirely and that things were still in progress going forward. We also heard from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio suggesting that Donald Trump was not going to be rushed into a deal. So here we are over the weekend where another 14-point memorandum of understanding was being discussed by both sides. Donald Trump saying that it was close to being done, walking it back to saying it's potentially going to be done. And here we now are on Monday waiting to see what both sides are ultimately going to determine.
Well, there seems to be so many challenges here, Reggie. How would a potential deal work exactly?
Well, from what we understand from this memorandum, it would touch on nearly all topics that have been, at the center of the conflict since this war started, including reopening the Strait of Hormuz, where the Americans say that the blockade will be lifted, but the Iranians say if that happens, then they're going to need to retain some kind of control over the strait, which has faced some criticism for violating international law. We also know that the United States has said that Iran can't charge any tolls, but Iran is saying, well, maybe we're going to charge some kind of passage fee, and it would need to be under our direction. There's also the issue here of Iranian frozen assets that they want to see released, along with reparations for war funds. Americans have potentially discussed the idea of Iranian assets, but there's some pushback from Republicans who argue that that would be too similar to the agreement that Barack Obama had negotiated during his second term that Donald Trump ripped up during his first term. The one thing that we do know is that this memorandum of understanding would simply allow for negotiations to continue in terms of things like nuclear issues in Iran. That would be something that would take some time to negotiate.
Let's talk about that. What about Iran's nuclear program? Because that still seems to be quite a sticking point here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've heard from the Iranian supreme leader last week to suggest that highly enriched uranium in the country would need to remain in Iran, even as the Americans say that it needs to leave the country. This memorandum of understanding ultimately punts the issue of Iran's nuclear program down the road to say that this would open up a 30 or 60-day time frame for the deal to then negotiate a deal on Iran's nuclear program. And again, that is facing some pushback from Republicans inside the United States, arguing that the main objective for this goal, for this war from the beginning, was to stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And if the nuclear material remains on the ground, then the question is, what was the point of this war starting in the first place? The Americans, Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, suggest that this is the best way to move forward. It is a question, though, as to whether both sides are ultimately going to come to an agreement. It appears right now that this deal simply looks more like an extension of a ceasefire.
All right, so even if there is a deal, Reggie, are we expecting immediate relief in terms of energy prices?
So this is what we've been hearing from analysts, that even if there is a deal struck to open up the Strait of Hormuz and nothing else is dealt with, it's going to take months to get the number of vessels in and out of the strait to where they used to be, on that 130, 140 vessels moving per day. There's also the issue here of what those vessels are going to be carrying. Yes, there are warehouses with oil and crude that have been stockpiled. That would be put onto the vessels first, but it would take significant amount of time to actually get oil production back to where it was before, because not only have the machines not been working, they would need to rebalance things like water and other materials that are used to extract the oil from the ground. That would take time. We would also see likely some delays in getting prices down overall. In order for Americans to pay $3 a gallon for gas, oil needs to hover around $60 a barrel. And Miranda, most analysts have said the point of $60 a barrel is probably not going to be reached again until the early 2030s.
All right, that is our Washington correspondent, Reggie Cecchini. Thank you for the update, Reggie.